Poor twin girls ask young Millionaire to be their dad at the school party. His response is unexpected. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows over the cracked sidewalks of a modest neighborhood just outside Phoenix, Arizona. The narrow streets bustled with the distant sounds of children playing, barking dogs, and the occasional sputter of an old car passing by. Inside a small, weather-worn two-bedroom house, 7-year-old twin girls, Madison and Lily, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, leafing through their school folders. Their blonde curls bounced as they turned each page, their freckled faces wearing identical expressions of curiosity and quiet hope. Emily, their mother, stirred a pot of soup in the tiny kitchen that opened into the living room. Her hair was pulled into a tired bun, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, marks of the double shifts she worked at a nearby diner. Still, she smiled gently as she watched her daughters, her love for them outweighing the exhaustion. Lily pulled out a brightly colored flyer from her folder and waved it in the air. "Mommy! Look! There's a Father's Day at school next Friday. It says we're supposed to bring our dad or someone like a dad." Emily's stirring slowed. Her heart clenched before she turned around, trying not to let the weight of that sentence show in her face. Madison had the same flyer in her hand, her eyes scanning it carefully. "Will our dad come?" Madison asked softly, her voice tinged with something Emily had heard too many times before, longing. Emily knelt beside them, pulling both girls close. "You know, sweetheart, your daddy isn't with us. But that doesn't mean you can't have a good time. Maybe you can take someone else? A teacher, or Mr. Jenkins from next door?" Lily frowned. "But he smells like fish sticks and never talks." Madison added, "Everyone else will have their real dads. It won't be the same." The silence that followed was heavy. Emily kissed both of their foreheads and stood, the smell of the simmering soup now replaced with the quiet ache of her daughter's disappointment. The next day at school, the buzz was all about the upcoming event. In the second-grade classroom of Miss Watson, the bulletin board was already decorated with cutout ties, silly mustaches, and pictures of last year's Father's Day celebration. Posters around the room said things like, "Bring your hero," and "Games, crafts, and snacks with Dad." Madison and Lily sat side by side at their desks, drawing half-heartedly while the other kids chattered excitedly about what their fathers were planning. Michael boasted about his dad bringing a homemade kite for the competition. Zoe said her dad was building a mini birdhouse with her. Even shy Liam whispered that his dad promised to teach him how to tie a real tie during the event. The twins looked at each other but didn't say a word. When the bell rang for recess, they walked silently to the swings. Lily kicked at the dirt. "We could pretend," she said suddenly. "Pretend what?" "That we have a dad. Just for the day." Madison considered this. "But who would believe us? We could find someone. Someone who looks like a dad." They glanced around the playground, scanning the parking lot beyond the fence. A man in a baseball cap waved at a group of kids, probably a coach or a volunteer. A delivery man walked toward the cafeteria. Nothing unusual. Then, a sleek black sports car pulled into the lot, engine humming like a beast. The door opened and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, sunglasses on, hair perfectly styled. He looked like he had stepped out of a movie. A few parents nearby did a double take. Lily gasped. "That's him." Madison blinked. "Who?" "That's Ethan Carter. The rich guy who gave the school all those new soccer nets and balls. Remember the news photo on the bulletin board?" Madison nodded slowly, watching as Ethan handed a clipboard to the principal and chatted briefly with a teacher. "He doesn't look like anyone's dad," Lily whispered. "But maybe he could be ours. Just for one day." Madison stared, her thoughts racing. They had nothing to lose. No dad to disappoint them. No one else to ask. Back at home that evening, Emily sat in her bedroom, staring at the flyer again. She had circled the date and written a reminder in her planner, though she had no idea why. She couldn't go in place of a father. She'd tried that one year, and the other kids' looks had stung more than anything. From the other room, she heard giggles. The twins were plotting something. She smiled faintly, unaware that a wild idea was forming in their minds, one that would set off a chain of events no one in their little world could have predicted. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood into a warm, pink twilight. In the twins' shared room, Madison whispered to Lily under the covers. "What if he says no? Then we ask someone else. And if he says yes?" Lily grinned. "Then we won't be the only ones without a dad at the party." Neither of them knew that the man in the black car, the millionaire with everything, was missing something just as deeply as they were. And soon, their lives were about to change in ways none of them could imagine. The school field trip to the community park had been planned for weeks. It was a welcome break for the children, a chance to run, explore, and stretch their imaginations outside the classroom walls. For Madison and Lily, however, it had become something more. The moment they stepped off the school bus and saw the sleek black car parked near the park entrance, their hearts began to race. They recognized it instantly. It was the same one from the school parking lot, the one they had whispered about in bed just days before. Their classmates spilled out onto the grassy field, shrieking with excitement as they raced toward the jungle gym and picnic tables. Miss Watson directed the chaos with a patient smile, her clipboard tucked under one arm. Madison and Lily, however, walked slowly, their eyes fixed on the man leaning casually against the car, talking to a city official about new equipment for the community youth program. It was Ethan Carter. He was dressed differently today, no suit, no sunglasses. Instead, he wore a gray sweater, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. Still, he stood out like a character in the wrong storybook. Children played around him, but none approached. He seemed almost too unreal, like someone who had been cut out of a magazine and placed into the park by mistake. Lily grabbed Madison's hand tightly. "We should ask now," she whispered. Madison hesitated. "Are you sure?" Lily nodded. "Before he leaves." They walked across the grass, weaving between a group of boys tossing a football and a line of girls waiting for face paint. As they drew closer, Ethan turned slightly, his gaze drifting over the field until it landed on them. He didn't seem surprised. He'd noticed them before, at school events, always in the background, quiet and watchful. When the girls stopped a few feet away, he crouched slightly to meet them at eye level. His smile was polite, but guarded. "Hey there," he said. "I remember you two from school. Madison and Lily, right?" Their eyes lit up. "You know our names?" Lily asked. "I try to remember everyone I meet," he replied. "What can I do for you?" The girls looked at each other, exchanging one final, silent agreement. Madison took a small step forward, her voice soft but clear. "Will you be our dad?" The question struck him like a gust of wind, gentle, but impossible to ignore. He blinked once, then tilted his head, as if trying to understand what he had just heard. Lily clarified quickly. "Just for one day. For the school event. Father's Day. We don't have a dad, and we didn't want to go alone." Ethan's smile faltered for a moment. He looked at the two girls, identical in appearance but distinct in their expressions. Madison's eyes held quiet hope, while Lily's carried the stubborn bravery of someone who had made up her mind and refused to back down. He stood slowly, glancing around the park. No reporters. No cameras. Just a man in a public space and two little girls asking for something he hadn't expected. He crouched again, choosing his words with care. "That's a big request." Madison's face fell slightly. "You don't have to if you don't want to." "No, it's not that," he said quickly. "It's just, I've never been asked something like that before." Lily, emboldened, took another step forward. "You helped our school. You gave us new balls and nets and even new swings. That's what dads do, right? Help." He gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, but astonished. "I suppose you're right." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he looked away, toward the skyline in the distance. Thoughts raced through his mind, about his image, the press, the expectations attached to his name. Accepting a child's request might seem innocent, but in his world, nothing ever stayed simple. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "Can I do that?" The twins nodded, though their smiles faded just a little. "Okay," Madison said, trying to sound brave. They turned and walked away slowly, their heads lowered in silent disappointment. Ethan remained where he was, watching them disappear into the crowd of children. Something inside him stirred, something quiet and long buried. It wasn't just their question that had shaken him. It was the way they had asked, with trust and honesty, expecting nothing more than a yes or no. No agenda. No manipulation. Just two little girls who didn't want to be alone on a day meant for families. Later that evening, as the field trip wrapped up and the children lined up to board the buses, Ethan stood by the tree line, hands in his pockets. He watched Madison and Lily giggle softly with their classmates, clearly trying to pretend everything was normal. When their eyes met his again, he gave a small wave. It wasn't a promise. But it wasn't a goodbye either. Back inside the bus, Lily leaned against the window, staring out at him until the trees hid him from view. "Do you think he'll come?" she whispered. Madison didn't answer right away. "Maybe." He didn't say no. Neither of them knew what Ethan was thinking as he stood alone in the fading sunlight. But something had shifted. He felt it. The question hadn't left his mind since they asked it. Not because it was strange, but because it had felt, somehow, right. He hadn't said yes. But he also hadn't said no. And for Madison and Lily, that was enough to hope. The sun had already begun to dip behind the horizon by the time Ethan returned to his downtown apartment. The top-floor penthouse overlooked the city's vast sprawl, lights flickering on in uneven patterns, casting an electric glow over Phoenix. Yet, for all the beauty of the view, his eyes remained unfocused. He stood in silence, jacket draped over a chair, tie still loosely knotted at his collar, the weight of a question still pressing against his chest. He had told them he needed time to think. And yet, every moment since leaving that park had been consumed with just that. He poured himself a glass of water and wandered toward the large glass windows. His apartment was immaculate, decorated with expensive furniture and original art pieces. Everything about the space spoke of control and detachment. There were no photographs, no signs of lived-in chaos, nothing personal beyond the bare essentials of wealth. He sat heavily on the couch and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For years, Ethan had mastered the art of carefully curated decisions. Every move he made was calculated. Every meeting, every deal, every public appearance. There was never room for uncertainty. But now two little girls had asked him to be their father for a single day. And he didn't know what the right move was. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. A message from Claire, his assistant. "Claire, received 3 press requests park visit today. Should we decline or redirect?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tossed the phone aside and rubbed his face with both hands. This wasn't a business meeting. It wasn't a brand campaign. It was something real, raw, and impossibly vulnerable. He couldn't remember the last time he had been looked at the way those girls had looked at him, with hope, with no suspicion, no expectations, just a wish. The silence in his apartment grew heavier. Finally, he stood up and walked to his office down the hall. It was a colder room than the rest, filled with files, framed certificates, and the kind of polished shelves that suggested more about success than personality. He opened the bottom drawer of a metal cabinet and pulled out a slim black box. Inside were a few old photographs, most of them forgotten. He thumbed through them slowly. One showed a rundown group home in Tucson. A Christmas morning with paper decorations on the wall. And there, in the corner of one photo, a young Ethan stood with 2 boys and a tired volunteer. All of them were smiling, faces smeared with cake. He hadn't thought about that place in years. The noise, the loneliness, the way other kids had family visits while he watched from the window pretending it didn't matter. Except it had. It always had. Maybe that was why the twins' question haunted him. He stayed in the office a long time, the hum of the city outside the only sound. When Claire called later that night, he didn't answer. Instead, he drafted an email, then deleted it. He wasn't ready to explain any of this. Not to his staff, not to his board, not even to himself. The next morning, Ethan arrived at his headquarters later than usual. His staff noticed immediately. He was always early, always crisp, always composed. But today he seemed distracted. During meetings, he stared out the windows more than at presentations. When people asked him questions, he responded slowly, measuring his words like he was somewhere else. In the privacy of his office, he sat at his desk, rereading the same financial report 3 times without absorbing a single line. A soft knock interrupted his days. Claire entered with her usual efficiency. Media still requesting comment about the park visit. No mention of the girls yet, but local news is poking around. Do you want to issue a statement? He looked at her, debating. Something generic, she offered. Like community engagement, support for local schools, that sort of thing? He shook his head. No statement. Not yet. Claire paused. Is this about the twins? He didn't answer directly, but his silence was enough. Claire nodded. You know the school's expecting guests for the Father's Day event next week. I know, he said, then leaned back, folding his hands together. How many kids go without anyone showing up? Claire blinked. I'm not sure. I can find out. Do that. She hesitated at the door. Ethan, if you're thinking about getting involved, personally, just know it's not the same as donating a check. There's press, optics, gossip. It'll get complicated. I know, he said again. She left without another word. By the end of the day, Ethan still hadn't made a decision. But the truth was, the choice had already begun to take root. That night, he drove without direction, circling neighborhoods he hadn't seen in years. Old apartment blocks, dimly lit streets, a diner he used to visit when he could only afford a cup of coffee and a bowl of fries. He parked outside it, engine idling, memories seeping through the windshield like fog. He had grown up without stability. Without affection. Without being asked to any school event. No one had ever offered to be there for him. No one had shown up just because he needed them to. And now, in a twist of fate he hadn't seen coming, 2 girls he barely knew had asked for that very thing from him. To show up. To be present. Just once. Maybe that was what rattled him most. It wasn't about pretending to be someone he wasn't. It was about being someone he might have needed himself. He left the car running and stepped out, walking aimlessly for several blocks. The cool night air was sharp against his skin, but he welcomed it. It cleared his mind, stripped away the noise. Under the streetlights, for a moment, he stopped being Ethan Carter, the millionaire, the board chairman, the philanthropist. He was just a man. A man being asked to give something he'd never been given. He didn't know yet what his answer would be. But the silence no longer felt like hesitation. It felt like the beginning of something. And that, more than anything, terrified him. The soft clatter of breakfast dishes filled the kitchen as morning sunlight filtered through the blinds. Emily moved with habitual precision, spreading peanut butter on toast and packing identical lunches into plastic containers while the radio murmured in the background. Madison and Lily sat at the small table, unusually quiet, their cereal bowls mostly untouched. Something about their stillness caught Emily's attention. Normally, mornings in their house were a blur of laughter, teasing, and half-finished conversations, but today the silence felt thick and deliberate. She glanced over her shoulder, watching them from the corner of her eye. "You two okay?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Lily shrugged. Madison avoided her gaze. Emily dried her hands slowly, then leaned against the counter. "Did something happen at school?" The twins exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them that made Emily's stomach twist. It was Madison who finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We asked someone to be our dad." Emily blinked, unsure if she had heard right. You what? At the park, Lily added quickly. During the field trip. We saw him and we thought, maybe he would say yes. Emily set the dish towel down. Who did you ask? Madison hesitated, then said, Ethan Carter. The name hit like a thunderclap. Emily's mind raced, picturing the man from the school's donation ceremony, the wealthy young philanthropist who had shown up in tailored suits and left behind checks with too many zeros. She had never met him personally, but his name had been on the lips of every parent and teacher for months. Now, somehow, her daughters had crossed paths with him, spoken to him, and made a request that felt both heartbreaking and wildly inappropriate. She sank into the nearest chair. Girls, you can't just ask a stranger to be your dad. He's not a stranger, Lily protested. He helped the school. He smiled at us. He listened. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, trying to suppress the sudden wave of embarrassment and fear. Her daughters had gone to one of the most visible figures in the city and asked him to fill a role that didn't belong to him. What if the press found out? What if the school staff took it the wrong way? What if Ethan thought she had put them up to it? What did he say? She asked finally. He said he'd think about it, Madison replied. Emily nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. She rose from the chair, walked into her bedroom, and closed the door quietly behind her. The moment it clicked shut, she pressed her hands to her face. The girls had meant well, of that, she was sure, but they had no idea how complicated the world really was. She had spent years shielding them from rejection, from pity, from the uncomfortable stares that came when other parents whispered about their situation. Now this. She sat at her small desk and pulled open the drawer that held her stationery. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a pen. She didn't know Ethan Carter. But she knew damage control. And this situation needed to be handled delicately. The letter she wrote was short, sincere, and carefully worded. She explained, without dramatizing, that her daughters had lost their father before they were born, that they sometimes struggled with the absence in ways she couldn't always predict, and that the recent school event had stirred something emotional in them. She made it clear that she hadn't known about their request, hadn't encouraged it, and certainly didn't expect anything from him. There was no appeal for help. No invitation for involvement. Only an apology for the awkwardness of the moment and an expression of gratitude for the kindness he had shown them, even briefly. She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and sat for several minutes staring at his name written in her neat, careful handwriting. That afternoon, Emily made her way to the school. She didn't ask to see Ethan. Instead, she gave the letter to the school secretary, who recognized her immediately and promised to pass it along discreetly through the proper channels. Emily thanked her and left, unsure if the letter would ever reach its destination, or if she wanted it to. Back at home, she found the girls in their bedroom, curled up together reading. She sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. I sent Mr. Carter a letter, she said. Both girls sat up instantly. What did you say? Madison asked. I told him that you asked him something very personal. And that you didn't mean to make him uncomfortable. I told him it wasn't his responsibility to say yes. Lily's face fell. So now he won't come? I don't know, Emily said gently. And that's not the point. The point is, we don't ask strangers to step into our lives like that. No matter how kind they seem. But he didn't feel like a stranger, Madison whispered. Emily touched her hair, brushing a curl behind her ear. Sometimes people feel close because we want them to be. But that doesn't mean they are. The girls were quiet again, but Emily could see the disappointment settling in. She kissed them each on the forehead and left the room, unsure if she had made anything better or worse. 2 days passed. Emily tried to move on. She picked up extra shifts at the diner, baked late into the night for a small catering order, and pretended not to notice that Madison and Lily were unusually subdued. She told herself it would pass. Kids were resilient. They'd bounce back. But late Thursday afternoon, as she walked through the front door still in her apron, the phone rang. The landline, rarely used except by the school or the bank. She picked it up, her heart skipping for no reason she could explain. "Hello? Miss Foster?" "Yes, speaking. This is Claire Layton. I'm Mr. Carter's assistant." Emily's stomach dropped. "Oh. Hello. I wanted to let you know that Mr. Carter received your letter. He asked me to thank you personally and to tell you that he appreciated the honesty. He's still considering the girl's request, but he wanted you to know it wasn't dismissed." Emily clutched the phone tighter. "I didn't mean to put him in an uncomfortable position." "I understand," Claire said. Her tone was professional, but not cold. "If he decides to attend the event, we'll be in touch." "No commitments yet?" "Of course. Thank you, Miss Foster. Have a good evening." The call ended. Emily stood in the middle of her kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder than anything else in the room. He hadn't said no. Later that night, as she tucked the girls into bed, she didn't mention the call. She didn't want to raise their hopes. But when Madison asked, just before drifting off to sleep, "Do you think he forgot about us?" Emily simply said, "I think he remembers you more than you know." And though her words were meant to comfort, deep inside, she couldn't shake the sense that something unexpected was beginning to unfold, something none of them could stop. The morning air was still crisp when Claire stepped into Ethan's office, a pale envelope clutched in her hand. She paused by his desk, waiting until he looked up from the reports scattered in front of him. His expression was tired, the kind of exhaustion that went beyond lack of sleep. She recognized it. It was the weight of indecision, and she had seen it grow heavier each day since the field trip. "This came through the school's administration office," she said, placing the envelope carefully in front of him. "It's from the girl's mother." Ethan looked at it for a long moment, saying nothing. The envelope was unmarked except for his name written in simple cursive. It had no logo, no printed letterhead, nothing demanding his attention, only the quiet presence of something deeply personal. Claire remained by the door. No media pickup yet. Everything still quiet. For now. He nodded but didn't respond. When she left the room, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the envelope as if it held something sacred. Slowly, he picked it up and opened it. The letter was handwritten. Neat, deliberate, not rushed. Every word chosen with care. She hadn't asked him for help. She hadn't asked for money. She hadn't even asked him to say yes. She had simply explained the moment. The girl's impulse, their innocence. The hole in their hearts where a father should have been. And, more than anything, she had given him an out, gracefully, respectfully, without bitterness. She understood if he didn't want to be involved. She didn't want him to feel pressure. But she hoped he would understand what had driven her daughters to speak to him at all. He read the letter once. Then again. And again. There was a line near the end that stuck with him. "They have questions I can't always answer, and wounds I can't always see. I try to protect them from the world, but sometimes, I think the world walks in anyway." Ethan folded the letter and placed it gently on his desk. Then he sat back and stared out the window, his thoughts restless. All day, the letter haunted him. Through every meeting, every conference call, every spreadsheet. His team noticed his distraction, but no one dared to mention it. Claire watched him with quiet understanding, knowing better than to press. By evening, he was still in his office, the lights of the city blinking in the distance. The letter was still there on the desk, now weighted down with a paperweight as if to keep it from drifting away. He picked it up again and ran his fingers over the creases. The fact that the mother had reached out at all surprised him. Most people in his world were transactional. They asked for favors with fake warmth or offered compliments loaded with expectation. But this letter wasn't like that. It was humble, human, and above all, real. And it stirred something in him that he had spent years suppressing. He rose from his chair, grabbed his coat, and headed for the elevator. Claire was still at her desk, typing quickly. "I'll be out for a while," he said as he passed. She stood. "Do you want a driver?" "No. I need to think. She watched him disappear down the hall and said nothing. Ethan didn't drive to any of his usual places. He drove aimlessly, letting his thoughts guide the wheel. He passed the school but didn't stop. Past the community park where he had first spoken to the girls, now empty and ghostly under the streetlights. Finally, after an hour of circling the city, he pulled over on a quiet residential street and sat in the car, engine idling. He thought about his own mother, how she had vanished before he ever had a chance to understand her. About the group homes. About the rotating foster families. About every time he had stood alone on a school playground while the other kids ran into the arms of their fathers. He had survived. Built walls. Learned how to create success from distance. But there were cracks now, and he felt them widening. The girls hadn't broken through with logic. They had reached something far more vulnerable, memory. He turned off the engine and sat in silence. Then, without overthinking it, he pulled out his phone. "Claire," he said when she answered. "Can you get me everything we know about the girls' school? Their teacher. Their class. The event details." There was a pause. "Are you going?" "I haven't decided," he said. "I just want the information." "Understood." The call ended. He placed the phone on the passenger seat and rested his head against the steering wheel. For the first time in years, he wasn't planning a business deal, or a speech, or a public initiative. He was trying to decide whether or not to walk into a classroom and sit beside two little girls who had asked him for something he didn't know how to give. It terrified him more than any boardroom negotiation ever had. The next day, Claire arrived at the office with a folder containing everything he had requested. He read through it carefully, the class list, the time of the event, the activities planned. There were crafts, lunch, and a short talent show. Just an ordinary school day to most people. But not to him. Not anymore. He opened the school's website. There were photos of last year's Father's Day event, dads with goofy smiles, kids hugging them, holding up paper ties and homemade cards. He scanned the images slowly until he found one that stopped him. A little boy sitting alone at a table, his art project untouched. A teacher crouched beside him, trying to fill the space. Ethan remembered moments like that too clearly. That could have been him. Or maybe that would have been Madison or Lily, until they decided to ask a stranger to fill the gap. He didn't sleep much that night. Instead, he walked the floor of his apartment, back and forth, until the city began to wake. The following morning, he called Claire into his office. "I need something simple," he said. "Nothing flashy. Just clothes that'll help me blend in. Like the other dads." Claire arched an eyebrow. "So, you're going?" "I'm thinking about it. I'll have options delivered by the end of the day." Ethan paused. "Claire, thank you." She gave him a small smile, something rare between them. "I hope they know what they've started." He didn't answer. But as she left, he unfolded the letter once more and read the final line. "Even if nothing comes of this, thank you for being kind. Sometimes that's more than enough." He wasn't sure yet if he could be more than kind. But for the first time in years, he wanted to try. The morning of the school's Father's Day event arrived with the usual hum of early chaos, cars lining the street outside the elementary building, parents balancing coffee cups and backpacks, children buzzing with anticipation. But one figure moved differently than the others. Ethan Carter stood outside the school in the parking lot, his hands tucked into the pockets of his simple blue jacket. He wore dark jeans and clean sneakers, and his usually styled hair had been combed back plainly. No cameras followed him today. No chauffeur waited at the curb. The luxury vehicle had been left in the underground garage of his building, replaced this morning by an anonymous rental car. He had made a choice. And he had made it quietly. No one had known he would be there. Not even Claire. The clothes she had picked out for him had arrived the day before, neatly folded and discreetly packaged, but he hadn't mentioned his final decision to anyone. He hadn't drafted a statement. He hadn't even scheduled his calendar around it. he had simply written down the time and address and told himself, "If I don't go, I'll regret it." As he approached the front doors of the school, a teacher standing at the entrance looked up, recognition dawning slowly on her face. "Mr. Carter?" He gave a small nod. "I'm here for the event." "Oh, of course. Come in. You're with the Foster twins, correct?" "Yes. Madison and Lily." She blinked. "They're already inside. The girls didn't say if anyone was coming." "I didn't say I would." The teacher opened the door wider. "Well, I think they're about to be very surprised." He walked down the hallway slowly, passing bulletin boards filled with crayon drawings and class photos. The noise of dozens of children echoed from the multipurpose room ahead. As he neared the entrance, he heard music playing softly, a cheerful tune about family and fun. Teachers moved between tables, guiding crafts and distributing juice boxes. Fathers and uncles and older brothers sat at folding chairs next to their kids, helping them cut paper or glue together lopsided decorations. Ethan hesitated at the threshold. Then, across the room, he saw them. Madison and Lily sat at a table near the back, side by side, surrounded by art supplies and half-finished projects. Their faces were blank, not sad, not bitter, just quiet. They moved their scissors with slow, unmotivated precision, as if they were trying to stay invisible. A wave of protectiveness hit Ethan unexpectedly. He stepped forward. The noise of the room didn't falter when he entered. A few parents looked up, curious. One teacher paused in mid-step. But the chaos of children quickly reclaimed their attention. Madison was the first to look up. Her eyes locked onto his. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then Lily turned, and gasped. They both stood up so fast their chairs scraped loudly against the floor. A few heads turned. "Mr. Carter?" Lily whispered. Ethan smiled, warm and hesitant. "Hi. You came," Madison breathed. "I said I'd think about it." He took another step forward. And then they ran to him. It wasn't dramatic or theatrical. No cameras clicked, no music swelled. It was simple, and silent, and completely disarming. Two little girls ran into his arms like they had known him forever. Like he was someone who had always been there. He crouched to their level and let them hug him. Their arms were thin but strong, clutching his jacket as if afraid he might vanish. "You didn't have to come," Madison said into his shoulder. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." They pulled back slowly, looking up at him with wonder. "Do we go back to the table now?" Lily asked. "Only if there's enough room for me." They beamed and led him across the room. A teacher nearby watched with cautious curiosity, but said nothing. Ethan sat between them, folding his long legs awkwardly under the too small table. Crayons, construction paper, and glue sticks were scattered across the surface. He picked up a pair of safety scissors and a sheet of blue paper. "What are we making?" he asked. "Paper ties," Lily said. "And thank you cards," Madison added. "For our dads." Ethan paused for a second. Then nodded. "Sounds like I've got work to do." For the next hour, he did what the other fathers did, cut and glued, colored and listened. He let Lily guide his hand when he messed up the shape of the tie. He let Madison read him her card 3 times because she was so proud of her handwriting. He laughed with them, asked them questions about their favorite subjects, their favorite cartoons, their favorite flavor of ice cream. He marveled at how different and yet how similar they were. Lily talked more. Madison watched more. But both trusted him, without hesitation. Across the room, whispers had started. Some parents recognized him. A few tried not to stare. One father nudged his wife and nodded in Ethan's direction. Ethan ignored it. This wasn't about them. Near the end of the event, the children were called to the front of the room for a short performance, a song they had practiced for weeks. The fathers and guests sat in rows of chairs, facing a makeshift stage area. Ethan settled into a seat in the second row. Madison and Lily stood in the front row of the group, holding hands. When the music began, they sang along with the others, but their eyes were only on him. And he watched them, completely still. He didn't think about his business. He didn't think about how this might look in the media. He didn't think about the shareholders or the board or the whispers behind him. He thought only of them. After the performance, he helped them gather their things and walked with them toward the exit. "Can we tell Mom you came?" Madison asked as they reached the parking lot. "Yes," Ethan said. "Please do. Will you visit again?" Lily asked. He smiled gently. "If your mom says it's okay." They hugged him one more time. And then they ran off toward a cluster of waiting parents. Ethan stood alone for a few seconds. The breeze tugged at his jacket. He looked back at the school, then at the playground beyond it. It was the same place where they had first asked him to be their dad. He hadn't said yes then. But something had changed. He walked back to the rental car slowly, his phone buzzing with missed calls and emails. He ignored them. When he finally opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He had shown up. And somehow, that felt more powerful than anything he had ever signed, built, or acquired. That evening, after the sun had dipped low over the Phoenix rooftops and the scent of barbecues drifted lazily through the neighborhood, Madison and Lily could barely contain their excitement. They sat on the worn living room couch, legs kicking, hands flying as they tried to tell Emily every detail at once. "He came. He sat with us the whole time. He made a paper tie, and it was so bad, but we said it looked perfect." Emily stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in one hand, her other hand unconsciously gripping the doorframe. She had spent the entire day nervously checking her phone, wondering if she should have gone to the school, if she had done the right thing sending that letter, if the girls would come home more hurt than before. But now they were glowing. She stepped forward slowly and sat on the arm of the couch. "He really came?" Madison nodded so hard her hair bounced. "And he stayed the whole time?" Emily studied their faces. There was no disappointment there. No letdown. Only joy, the kind of joy that doesn't come from gifts or grand gestures, but from something deeper, being seen. "I'm glad," she said softly. "I'm really, really glad." Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Emily stood in the quiet kitchen holding a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She stared at the calendar on the fridge, at the red circle around today's date, and wondered what this meant. Ethan Carter was not just a man who passed through. He had shown up, stayed, and made an impression she hadn't expected. She didn't know what would come next, but she couldn't deny what had already happened. The next morning brought a subtle shift. It wasn't in the way Madison and Lily dressed for school or how they carried their backpacks, it was in the way they held themselves. Straighter backs. Brighter smiles. They looked steadier. At recess, they were swarmed by curious classmates. "Was that your real dad? Is he famous? Why did he sit with you?" Madison and Lily didn't offer much. They simply said, "He's our friend," and left it at that. But the attention didn't go unnoticed by the teachers. Miss Watson, their homeroom teacher, approached Emily during pickup that afternoon. "I just wanted to tell you," she said carefully, "whatever happened yesterday, it meant a lot to them. I've never seen them more engaged. Or more confident." Emily smiled politely. "Thank you. It meant a lot to them too." Inside, though, she wrestled with a question that refused to leave her: where did this go now? A few days passed. No calls. No emails. No cards. Just silence. Then, on Thursday afternoon, a small envelope appeared in the mailbox. No return address. Just her name, handwritten neatly. Inside, a short note. "Thank you for the chance to be there. If it's okay with you, I'd like to see them again. Only if they want. No pressure. No signature, but she knew who it was from. Emily sat at the kitchen table with the note in her hand, unsure how she felt. Grateful, yes. Protective, absolutely. But also cautious. This wasn't something she could afford to misread. Ethan Carter lived in a world that operated on a different rhythm, with different stakes. Her daughters lived in a world where every small kindness could be mistaken for a promise. That night, she showed the note to Madison and Lily. They didn't squeal or jump or beg. Madison looked at it quietly. I think he liked being with us. Lily nodded. I think he was lonely too. Emily took a deep breath. So what do you want me to tell him? Just tell him, he can come over for dinner, Lily said. Not as our dad. Just, as Ethan. Emily smiled despite herself. Okay. She pulled out her phone and typed a short message from an anonymous email account, the one she used for school correspondence. They'd like you to come for dinner. We're not fancy, but we're honest. Let me know what day works. She hesitated a moment, then hit send. The reply came 20 minutes later. Tomorrow? I'll bring dessert. And I don't expect fancy. The following day, Emily left work early and rushed home. She vacuumed the living room twice, wiped the kitchen counters 3 times, and reheated leftover pasta because she didn't have time to cook anything better. She set the table and told herself it was ridiculous to be nervous. But she was. At exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, a gentle knock came at the door. Emily opened it to find Ethan standing there in jeans and a plain white button-down shirt, holding a brown paper bag in one hand. Hi, he said. I brought cookies. From a bakery downtown. They said kids like them. Emily stepped aside. Come in. He walked in slowly, glancing around. The space was small, cluttered in the way that homes with children often are, piles of schoolbooks, a leaning stack of DVDs, a couch blanket thrown over one armrest. But it was warm. It was real. The girls peeked around the corner and then ran to him. You came. Madison said. You really brought dessert. Lily added, eyeing the bag. I keep my promises, Ethan said, smiling. They sat at the table together, and for the first time, there was no event, no expectation, just dinner. Ethan listened to the girls talk about school, about a funny moment in gym class, about how they hated spelling tests. He asked them questions, gave them his full attention. He complimented their art stuck to the fridge. He laughed when Lily spilled her water and helped clean it without hesitation. Emily watched all of it from across the table. And slowly, her apprehension eased. After dinner, the girls insisted he stay for a board game, something called Magic Island, which made little sense and had too many rules. But Ethan played it like it was the most important thing in the world. And when he finally stood to leave, 2 hours later, neither girl wanted to let him go. He knelt to hug them both. Thank you for dinner. And the game. And for letting me come. Will you come again? Madison asked. If your mom says it's okay. Emily met his eyes. For the first time, they shared something unspoken, a mutual respect. A quiet agreement. She nodded. Next Friday. Same time. As he stepped out into the night, he looked back once. Not at the house. Not at Emily. But at the space where he had just felt more at home than he had in a long time. And somewhere inside him, something settled. Not with certainty. Not with finality. But with hope. The next morning began like any other in their modest home, sunlight filtering through cafe curtains, Emily bustling with breakfast tasks while Madison and Lily prepared for school. But a subtle restlessness hovered in the air. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted beyond their front door. As the girls scurried off to school, Emily checked her phone. A notification blinked red on the local news app. Mystery man at school's Father's Day event sparks online buzz. She hadn't anticipated any attention. Ethan's visit was meant to be quiet, between strangers whose lives had briefly touched. But the internet didn't always honor boundaries. Her heart pounded. She opened the article cautiously. It described a well-dressed man, identified by one photo as a local philanthropist, unexpectedly appearing at the school event and sitting affectionately between two young students, earning praise for his kindness and discretion. Comments overflowed with speculation, some warm, some skeptical. Some wrote, "A heartwarming surprise at the school event." Others wondered, "Is this a PR stunt?" Her fingers hovered over the comments, but she scrolled quickly past. She couldn't let headlines lead the narrative of her daughter's weekend. Still, she felt exposed, torn between protecting their privacy and recognizing that good deeds sometimes resonated beyond small circles. By midday, her phone rang. The school secretary was on the line, her voice pitched low and kind. "Ms. Foster, we've had a few parent calls this morning, wondering about the mystery dad. Some want to speak to you, others just left questions." Emily exhaled slowly. She replied gently, thanked them for their concern, but asked them not to call moms. "It's personal." "Thank you." She closed her eyes briefly. This was more than she had bargained for when she let kindness guide her daughter's request. Later, after school, Madison and Lily bounded in, breathless with excitement, and a little apprehension. "Mom," Madison began, "everyone in class was talking about it. Some kid said you invited him. Some said he was taking his own kids to the party. I don't know what to say." Emily knelt before them, voice steadying. "You tell them this, he's our friend. You don't have to explain anything else. I asked him because I felt safe letting him come because I trusted him. That's enough." The girls nodded, but their faces held a quiet concern. Emily gave them each a warm squeeze, then gathered herself. That evening, as she prepared dinner, another knock sounded on the door. It wasn't Ethan. Someone from the local paper stood there instead, notebook in hand. "Ms. Foster? Could I ask you a few questions?" Emily steadied herself. "I'm sorry, this is a private matter." "Thank you." She closed the door calmly, then leaned against it for a moment. She realized protecting her family meant more than being polite, it meant standing guard against curiosity, even when the world smiled innocently. Later, Ethan called. 3 requests from reporters asking for a statement, Claire said gently in his ear. "Also, the school acting with discretion, but there's chatter." Ethan took a breath. "I understand." Emily's phone buzzed minutes later, a text from a blocked number, "Stop using our girls for attention." She stared at it and felt the walls closing in. But then she remembered why the journey had started in the first place, 2 little hearts opening to the possibility of belonging. She texted back, uncharacteristically brave, "They are not yours. Don't contact again." The sender never responded. The following evening, Ethan arrived again, quieter this time, darker skies behind him. They sat in the living room, the glow of a table lamp settling the space. "I asked the press office to say nothing," he told Emily. "Let me handle it." Emily nodded, grateful. "I want them safe in their own story, not headlines." He smiled gently. "Thank you." They sat in silence, not needing words. Later, as he left, Madison and Lily peeked from the hallway. Emily mouthed silently, "Did he say anything?" "They don't know we're not related," Lily whispered. Emily's heart tightened and her gaze softened. She tucked the girls into bed and whispered to them, "Let's keep this ours. Just ours." They smiled, relief shining in their eyes. In the quiet house that followed, Emily pulled out the calendar and circled next Friday, then wrote beneath it, "Family dinner." Words that felt tender, hopeful, and enough for now. It was nearly a week after the Father's Day event when the shift began to happen, not just in the way the twins smiled more confidently or in the way Ethan lingered longer at the dinner table, but in the quiet unraveling of something far older, buried beneath years of forgotten names and unfinished stories. That Friday, Ethan arrived at the Foster home as he had the 2 previous weeks, each visit feeling less like a favor and more like a habit. He carried a grocery bag with ingredients this time instead of bakery sweets, insisting he wanted to cook something himself. The girls were thrilled at the novelty of watching a grown man try to flip pancakes and stir sauce at the same time, while Emily, arms crossed, half smiling, watched from the edge of the kitchen, amused and cautious in equal measure. After dinner, with the dishes cleared and the girls settled in the living room building a puzzle, Ethan sat at the kitchen table nursing a mug of tea. Emily joined him, wiping her hands on a dish towel before folding it neatly on the table. "You're getting better at flipping pancakes," she said, a trace of laughter in her voice. "I burned half of them," Ethan replied. "Progress," she smiled. There was a pause between them, the kind that didn't feel heavy but simply allowed space. Then Ethan looked up, his voice quieter. "Can I ask you something personal?" Emily didn't flinch. "Of course. I was reading your letter again. You mentioned that the girl's father, he passed before they were born. And that you have a brother who grew up in one of the group homes in Tucson." Emily tilted her head slightly, surprised. "Yes. Jeremy. My older brother. I think I knew him." There was a beat of silence. "I spent 5 years at Ridgeview Home," Ethan continued. "Between the ages of 7 and 12. There weren't many of us who stayed long-term. But there was one boy I remember clearly. He had this reckless laugh, wild ideas. He talked a lot about his baby sister." Emily's voice caught in her throat. "Jeremy was always getting into trouble. But he wrote to me from Ridgeview sometimes. He said he had a best friend who helped him sneak extra dessert on Fridays." Ethan smiled, the memory vivid. "That was me." The room fell quiet again, though this time it pulsed with something unexpected. A shared thread suddenly pulled taut across time. Emily stood slowly and crossed to the small bookshelf in the living room. She pulled out a faded photo album and returned to the table, flipping through until she found a picture. A grainy snapshot from 2 decades ago, 2 boys standing shoulder to shoulder in matching t-shirts, grinning with the mischief of children who'd seen too much, yet still chose to smile. She placed it in front of Ethan. He stared at it for a long moment. "That's him," he said softly. "And that's me." Emily sat down again. "I always wondered what happened to the friend he talked about. He said you were the smartest kid he'd ever met. That you told him stories to help him sleep when the building was too noisy." Ethan laughed under his breath. "I forgot about that. I used to make up stories about a pirate who only stole books. Jeremy called him Captain Page." They both smiled. Then Ethan's expression shifted. "What happened to him?" Emily hesitated. "He left the group home at 17. Tried to get work, stay clean. But it was hard. He got caught in a bad crowd, then disappeared. I haven't heard from him in years. No one has. I always hoped he'd just find his way. Maybe even find me again. But I don't know if he's still alive." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. Emily nodded. "So am I." They sat there for a while, the quiet between them now heavy with memory. "I don't believe in coincidence," Emily said finally. "But I also didn't expect this. That you, of all people." "I didn't expect it either," Ethan replied. "But it makes sense now. Why the girls felt familiar. Why I couldn't walk away." Emily looked at him, something tender in her expression. Maybe it wasn't just them reaching out. Maybe it was him. Through them. That night, after Ethan left, Emily sat alone with the photo album in her lap. She turned the pages slowly, remembering the years when Jeremy had tried to be her protector, even from far away. And now, somehow, the man who had protected him had found his way to her door. In his own apartment, Ethan stood in front of his mirror, staring at his reflection, not the polished version the world knew, but the boy who used to lie awake on the bottom bunk, wondering if anyone would remember him. Jeremy had remembered. And through Emily, through Madison and Lily, that memory had come full circle. The next morning, Ethan called Claire. "Find me everything you can about Jeremy Foster," he said. "Start with old group home records. I need to know what happened to him." Claire didn't ask questions. She simply said, "On it." Ethan hung up and walked to the window. The city spread out before him, bright and cold. He wasn't sure where the search would lead. But he knew he owed it to the boy who had once shared stolen cake and whispered stories of hope in a home that offered neither. And he knew, now more than ever, that what had started as a single question from two little girls had become something much larger, a journey back to a part of himself he had long tried to forget. The polished conference room on the 42nd floor of Carter Holdings was as pristine as ever, glass walls that shimmered with the skyline, a 12-foot walnut table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs, and a large digital display at the far end of the room scrolling through quarterly projections. The board had gathered in full, summoned not by Ethan himself, but by murmurs and concerns trickling up from investors, advisors, and internal whispers about his recent unstructured engagements. Claire stood near the door, arms crossed, her eyes moving sharply from one board member to the next. She had warned him this would come. A company like his, leaning on image, trust, calculated public presence, could only tolerate so much unpredictability from its figurehead before questions began boiling over. Ethan entered the room 5 minutes after the hour, without the tailored suit he usually wore to these meetings. He came in a plain black jacket, open collar, no tie. He didn't carry a tablet or a printed agenda. Just himself, and a calm he hadn't felt in years. The hum of low conversation died down the moment he stepped in. "Morning," he said, moving to the head of the table. No one returned the greeting. Victor Greer, the head of investor relations and one of the company's most conservative board members, leaned forward. "Ethan, thank you for making time. We've had some pressing concerns arise over the last 10 days. Ethan, Saturday, I'm aware." Victor exchanged a glance with Diane Tang, a strategic operations analyst. She picked up a tablet and placed it in front of her, her tone clipped and rehearsed. "Social media activity has increased significantly around your attendance at a local school event. Speculation has led to coverage by 4 regional outlets and 1 national blog. Most of the content is positive. But it's uncoordinated. Off-brand. Not traceable to any of our foundations or CSR initiatives." "And?" Ethan asked, voice even. Diane blinked. "Well, you've created noise. And where there's noise, there's scrutiny. People are asking what you're doing in your personal time, who the children were, whether this is part of a new campaign, or something less structured." Ethan nodded slowly. "I see." Victor cleared his throat. "You've always been extremely careful with your image. We've built this company on your narrative. Self-made. Calculated. Socially responsible but never messy. This? It's emotionally volatile. It's not vetted. And if it continues, it could destabilize investor confidence." "I understand your concern," Ethan replied. "But I'm not running a campaign. I didn't do it for the press. I showed up because 2 children asked me to. And I don't regret it." Another board member, a young tech strategist named Owen, spoke for the first time. "It's not just the school visit. You've missed 2 investor lunches. Your Friday evenings have been blocked off without explanation. Claire's been deflecting meetings. And now we're hearing rumors that you've initiated private searches into Foster system records?" That caught Ethan's attention. He looked at Claire, who gave the faintest nod. Someone had been paying closer attention than expected. Ethan turned back to the table. "Yes. I'm looking for someone from my past. Someone who mattered to me once. That's personal. And it's not relevant to this company's standing." Victor leaned forward, his voice sharper now. "Everything you do is relevant. You are the brand. If you're no longer capable of separating personal from public, we may have to reevaluate how we position you within this company." Ethan didn't flinch. "Is that a threat?" "It's a consideration," Victor said. "For your own protection as well as ours. If this continues, you might consider stepping back. Temporarily." The room fell still. Claire stepped forward slightly from her place near the wall. "May I?" Victor hesitated. You're not on the board, Ms. Layton. No, but I manage Mr. Carter's calendar. And I have for nearly 7 years. If I may speak to what I've seen. Victor gestured reluctantly. Claire's voice was cool but firm. Yes, Ethan has changed his routine. Yes, he's missed some engagements. But I've never seen him more present in his decision-making. He's not distracted, he's grounded. For the first time, he's operating from something real, not optics. Victor looked unimpressed. We're not a therapy group. We're an investment firm. Ethan stood. I appreciate all of you being here. And I respect the work we've built together. But I'm not here to ask permission. I've given this company everything since I was 23 years old. It's time I make space for something else. Owen frowned. What are you saying? I'm stepping back. Temporarily. Not because I'm overwhelmed. Not because I'm incapable. But because I'm making a choice to invest in something that doesn't fit in a quarterly report. Silence again. Victor's voice was colder now. And what should we tell the board of investors? Ethan met his eyes. Tell them the truth. That the man they backed is still the man they backed. But he's choosing to be more than a brand. He turned to Claire. You'll act as interim coordinator. No decisions over $5 million without board approval. Full transparency on operations. Claire nodded, stunned but composed. Understood. He paused at the door. One more thing, he said, turning back. I'm not stepping back out of fear. I'm stepping forward into something I've ignored for too long. He left the room without waiting for a response. Claire followed, catching up to him by the elevators. They won't all like it. I know, he said. But some things are worth it. As the elevator doors slid open, Claire asked quietly, was it the girls? It started with them, Ethan replied. But it's about something bigger now. Later that night, Emily opened her front door to find Ethan standing there, not with a bag of food or a clipboard, but with nothing in his hands at all. I told my board today that I'm taking time off. She stepped aside. Come in. And for the first time, Ethan crossed the threshold not as a guest or a volunteer, but as someone beginning to choose presence over performance, quiet over legacy. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd made the right decision. The days following Ethan's announcement passed with a strange stillness. Not the kind that came with absence or indecision, but the sort that suggested something vital was slowly settling into place. In his absence from Carter Holdings, speculation continued to swirl among financial outlets and curious observers, but Ethan didn't answer questions, didn't release statements, and didn't return to the office. Instead, he returned to something simpler, showing up, consistently, to the one place where his presence wasn't tied to strategy or expectation. Emily's home. By the third Friday dinner, his routine had become familiar. He brought groceries. He let the twins boss him around in the kitchen. He helped with homework, even the dreaded math worksheets. The couch, once something he hesitated to sit on, had become his corner. He knew where the spare napkins were kept. He learned how to change the batteries in the faulty TV remote. And each week, he stayed just a little longer. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep and Emily was rinsing out mugs at the sink, Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Emily didn't answer immediately. She dried her hands on a towel and turned to face him. I think that's not for me to answer. He raised an eyebrow, smiling faintly. Diplomatic. I think it depends on what you're trying to be right about, she said. Running a company? Walking away? Being here? All of it. She considered that. Then yes. Because you're not just reacting anymore. You're choosing. He watched her for a long moment, then nodded, as if confirming something to himself. That weekend, he asked if he could take Madison and Lily to the museum. Not a grand, curated photo op kind of outing, just a regular Saturday, 2 kids and 1 adult trying to remember where the car was parked after 3 hours of ancient bones and rocket exhibits. Emily agreed, though not without her usual protective hesitation. When they returned, flushed and windblown, the girls were buzzing with stories about dinosaurs, space capsules, and how Ethan got caught in a revolving door trying to carry too many maps. He stayed for dinner that night. And then, unexpectedly, for breakfast the next morning. By the following week, he had started leaving some things behind: a forgotten jacket on the coat hook, a book on the armrest, a second toothbrush in the bathroom that no one mentioned but everyone noticed. Still, he hadn't defined what this was. Not to Emily. Not to the girls. Not even to himself. Until one afternoon, a letter arrived. It was official, crisp, and sealed in a navy blue envelope from the office of the state's Family Services Division. Inside, a formal notice. Someone had filed a query about legal guardianship concerning minors Madison and Lily Foster. No action had been taken, no process begun. It was merely a notification that Ethan Carter's name had been entered into the system under voluntary interest. Emily sat on her bed with the letter in hand, her mind racing. He hadn't mentioned it. He hadn't even hinted. When he arrived that evening, carrying a bag of groceries and a small board game tucked under his arm, she met him at the door. "You did something without telling me." He stopped, brows raised. "What happened?" She held up the envelope. He stepped inside, gently placed the bags on the table, and let the silence fall between them before speaking. "I didn't submit a formal petition. I just asked what the process looks like. That's all. I needed to understand it. You didn't think to ask me first?" "I didn't know how." They stood in the narrow space between the kitchen and the hallway, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. "I wasn't trying to overstep," Ethan said. I wanted to know if there was a path. Not now. Not tomorrow. But maybe someday." Emily looked at him carefully, her voice lower now. "They already call you their almost dad. Do you know that?" He closed his eyes briefly. "No. I didn't put that in their heads," she said. "It just happened. Quietly." He looked up. "And how do you feel about that?" "I feel like I don't want to keep explaining to them what temporary means. And I feel like you haven't run in weeks." "Not once." He gave a small, pained smile. "I stopped running the day they asked me to stay." That night, after the girls were in bed and the dishes were done, Emily stepped outside with Ethan. They sat on the small porch steps, the air warm and still. "I'm not asking you to become their father," she said softly. "And I don't want you to ask that of yourself unless you know what it really means." "I do know," he said. "It means showing up. And staying. And listening. And giving them answers even when they're not easy." She looked at him sideways. "And it means being part of my life, too. Not just theirs." He reached over and took her hand. "I know that too." The next morning, Ethan sat down with Madison and Lily at the breakfast table. They were halfway through their cereal when he placed a small envelope between them. Inside was a note. "If I could write the kind of story Captain Page would read to you, it would start with this: a man was once very lost. But then he met 2 girls who helped him find his way back. And they didn't ask for much, just that he be there. So, if you'll let me, I'd like to keep being there. For as long as you want me." They didn't speak. They just hugged him, arms tight, as if they were afraid the letter would disappear if they let go. And Ethan knew, without boardrooms or contracts or headlines, that he had made the bravest decision of his life. The rhythm of life in the Foster household began to change subtly, though not abruptly. No dramatic announcements were made. There were no sudden declarations or overnight transformations. Instead, the shift revealed itself in smaller, quieter ways: Madison and Lily waking up with excitement even on Mondays, Emily finding herself humming softly while preparing breakfast, and Ethan making dinner without needing to ask where the plates were. By early October, Ethan's presence was no longer a novelty but a fixture. He had become something real to the girls, someone they could count on to help with a tricky word in their reading book or to cheer from the bleachers during their short-lived stint in the school's beginner soccer program. He arrived early for parent-teacher conferences and left late after helping clean up the classroom, never once drawing attention to himself. One afternoon, while picking the girls up from school, Emily stood beside him as they waited near the courtyard. Another parent approached, a woman in her early 40s with 2 children tugging on her coat. "You're Ethan Carter, aren't you?" the woman asked cautiously. Ethan gave a polite nod. "I just wanted to say, whatever it is you're doing with those girls, it's working. They've changed. More confident, more joyful. It's a good thing." Emily watched the woman walk away, then turned to Ethan with a faint smile. "You're getting good at blending in." He chuckled. "It only took most of my adult life." At home, new doors began opening for Emily as well. She had long buried a quiet talent for baking, something she had once considered turning into a business before life overwhelmed her with diapers, bills, and grief. Now, with Ethan's gentle encouragement and some strategic help from a local nonprofit he quietly funded, she was beginning again. The first step came in the form of a fold-out table at the neighborhood farmers market. On her first Saturday selling cinnamon rolls and lemon bars, she wore her old apron, hair tied back, hands shaking as she set up. Madison and Lily helped place labels, while Ethan hovered nearby, pretending not to supervise but clearly invested. By noon, most of her inventory had sold out. Customers praised the flavors. A local coffee shop owner asked about a partnership. And Ethan, ever subtle, stood in the background watching her field questions with confidence she hadn't shown in years. "You did this," she said to him later that night. He shook his head. "You did this. I just reminded you it was still in you." With the growing popularity of her stall, Emily began baking full-time. She named her small brand Sweet Lily and Mads, a tribute not only to her daughters but to the version of herself she was rediscovering. The nonprofit helped with marketing and permits, while Ethan made sure the necessary connections came through without exposing himself. Meanwhile, the girls thrived. At school, teachers noticed Madison's growing assertiveness. Where she had once whispered in class, she now raised her hand. She even volunteered to read a poem during the fall assembly, her voice shaking but strong as she spoke each line. Lily, always more vocal, had become something of a leader among her peers. She organized a classroom book swap and worked with her teacher to create a kindness board where students could leave notes for one another. During a parent meeting in November, Miss Watson took Emily and Ethan aside. "I don't want to overstep," she said, "but I think it's important you both know something. Your girls, they're not just doing well. They're inspiring others. The whole classroom dynamic has changed because of the energy they bring." Emily nodded slowly. "Thank you." Outside the classroom, life for the girls took on new dimensions as well. Ethan enrolled them in weekend music lessons, something small, a community-run program that offered group instruction in piano and violin. Madison gravitated toward the piano, patient and quiet, while Lily insisted on the violin, loud and unpredictable. It was a kind of structured chaos that made Ethan laugh every Saturday morning. The three of them developed traditions that belonged only to them. Thursday evenings became movie night, complete with popcorn, blankets, and arguments over who got the middle spot on the couch. Sundays were reserved for adventures, hiking trails, flea markets, or simply discovering a new library or used bookstore. But through all this, one question remained suspended in the background, unspoken but present. Was Ethan still just their almost dad? One evening in December, while helping Madison fold a paper snowflake for a holiday project, Lily blurted out the question they had both been holding on to. "Ethan, do you think someday we could call you Dad?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked between the two girls, then over to the kitchen where Emily stood watching, her expression unreadable. "I think names matter," he said carefully. "But what really matters is that you know I'm here. No matter what you call me." Madison looked down at the snowflake in her hand, then nodded. "Okay. But, if we ever forget and just say it, is that all right?" Ethan reached across the table and touched her hand. that would be more than all right. That night, when the girls were asleep, he joined Emily on the back porch. The sky above was full of stars, and the desert air had turned cold. "They asked me if they could call me Dad," he said. She didn't react with surprise. "I figured that would happen eventually." He turned to face her. "Does it scare you?" "I think what scares me," she said softly, "is how natural it feels. Like we didn't plan this, but it's exactly what it needed to be." He reached out and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "No plans," he said. "Just presence." Over time, the community's curiosity dulled. Ethan Carter, once known only through headlines and glossy event photos, had become something else. Just Ethan, the man who waited in the school pickup line, who carried a thermos of coffee to every music recital, who learned how to fix a broken drawer in a 7-year-old's dresser. And perhaps most notably, the man who didn't save them, but stood beside them as they saved each other. The last week of the school year brought a kind of energy that couldn't be contained. The hallways of Madison and Lily's elementary school echoed with laughter and the clatter of small sneakers, classrooms brimming with end-of-year crafts, review games, and handmade cards exchanged between classmates. For the twins, this final week wasn't just the conclusion of another academic cycle, it was the closing of a chapter that had changed everything. The school's annual winter celebration had become the most anticipated event on the calendar. Part recital, part family gathering, it drew teachers, relatives, and friends into the multipurpose room transformed with silver streamers, makeshift snowflakes, and a paper chimney where children could hang gratitude stars, marked with notes of appreciation. That Thursday afternoon, Emily helped Madison and Lily get dressed. Matching navy blue cardigans, simple white dresses, their hair pinned back with quiet precision. The girls giggled and squirmed, too excited to stay still. In the living room, Ethan waited with a quiet smile, holding the small box of chocolate truffles he had picked up for the teacher gift table. He wore a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, simple, familiar, like he belonged. "You nervous?" he asked when the girls appeared from the hallway. "Nope," Lily said with a grin. "Maybe a little," Madison admitted. "You've got this," he said, opening the front door for them. The school parking lot was overflowing by the time they arrived. Ethan dropped Emily and the girls at the entrance before circling to find a spot further down the block. When he entered the building moments later, it was already crowded, voices filling the air like warm static. As he walked toward the assembly room, a few parents recognized him and offered polite nods, but no one interrupted. The curiosity had settled into quiet acceptance. Inside, Emily had saved a seat for him beside her near the third row. She handed him a folded program with the girls' names highlighted in yellow. "Number 12, she said. "Small group performance." Ethan glanced down the list. "Holiday medley?" Emily smirked. "Prepare to hear at least 3 off-key renditions of Jingle Bells." When the lights dimmed, the chaos of the crowd softened into an anticipatory hush. The principal stepped up to the microphone and gave a few welcoming words, followed by applause and camera flashes. One by one, the performances began, small clusters of students singing, reciting poems, or acting out short skits. Ethan watched with a kind of stillness that surprised even him. A year ago, he would have never imagined himself here. Surrounded by paper snowmen, sitting beside a woman who had once written him a letter out of embarrassment, waiting to watch 2 children who had asked a stranger to be their dad for a day. And yet here he was, not as a guest or an observer, but as someone who had stayed. When act number 12 was announced, Emily reached over and gently tapped his hand. "They're up." Madison and Lily walked onto the stage with a small group of 5 classmates, their faces lit with a mixture of nerves and pride. When the music began, they sang with energy and joy, their voices blending into the chorus of "Let It Snow" and "Winter Wonderland," with Madison occasionally glancing toward Ethan, checking to make sure he was watching. He was. When the song ended, the room filled with applause, and Ethan rose with the rest of the crowd to cheer. Emily looked at him, not just with appreciation, but with something deeper, something rooted in months of quiet transformation. After the final performance, the families gathered in the gymnasium for hot cocoa and cookies. The twins pulled Ethan from table to table, introducing him to their friends, their teacher, and even the school janitor. At every stop, they referred to him the same way. "This is Ethan." No label. No explanation. Just Ethan. And that was enough. Eventually, Madison tugged at his sleeve and whispered something in his ear. He crouched beside her. "What's that?" She blushed. "We made something for you." From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small rectangular card made of thick construction paper. On the front, drawn in glittery marker, was a house with 3 figures in the doorway. Inside, it read, "Thank you for being the kind of person who shows up and stays." Below the message were their signatures, and beneath that, a single line in Lily's handwriting, "Our not-so-almost dad." Ethan held the card for a long time before folding it carefully and slipping it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He didn't speak. He just hugged them both. Later, as they walked back to the car under a canopy of stars and winter wind, Lily looked up at Ethan and asked, "Are we yours now?" He looked over at Emily, who met his gaze and nodded gently. "You always have been," he said. The ride home was filled with soft music and tired laughter. The girls leaned against each other in the back seat, eyelids growing heavy, paper snowflakes and art projects resting in their laps. At home, Emily helped them change into pajamas, tucked them in, and turned off the lights. Then she joined Ethan in the living room, where he stood by the window looking out over the quiet neighborhood. "They called you not so almost," she said softly. He turned toward her. "I like that." She stepped closer. "So, what now?" He considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Now, we keep going. One dinner at a time. One bedtime story. One science project. I don't need to name it all right away. I just want to be here. As long as you'll have me." Emily reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "We're already here." The months ahead would bring new challenges, questions about paperwork, logistics, timing. There would be tough days and wonderful ones. But they would face them together. Not as a charity project. Not as a story for the press. But as a family, imperfect and beautifully formed by choice, resilience, and affection. And in that little house in Phoenix, where once there had been only struggle and survival, now there was laughter, quiet trust, and a man who had answered a simple question from 2 girls, and found everything he didn't know he needed.